Okay, we are live on Pure Portugal. Okay. Hello, everybody. I hope people are hopping online and maybe be joining us shortly. You can leave a comment if you want to, and we'll be able to see them. So you can ask questions as we go through. We are today talking about Boaz, do you want to introduce what it is that you're specifically wanting to talk about? Do you want to summarize for us?
Yeah, first of all, good morning. Good morning, everyone, whoever's here. A bit new to this, so I'm not sure I'm seeing everyone. So if you're here, say comment or say hello, so we know you're here, because
So we know
we're working through another platform, not through Facebook directly. Well, yeah, first of all, thank you for the invitation, Claire. Good morning. We're still kind of recovering from the fires in the area. But yeah. I think the fires were triggered to bring up a bigger topic, I think, which is a bit more complex. And I think that's the focus of our conversation today, which has to do with generally the monocultures, and specifically the avocado plantation and monoculture that's has been set up now, is running near Barão São João in the southwest Algarve, close to Lagos. Mm-hmm. And it's the biggest in Europe. But not just specifically with that and fundraising for that, because we're taking some legal action to try and stop that and take care of the environment here, but also to put that in a bigger context for everything from water management to the fire hazard and the problem with monocultures generally in Portugal, but all the way to how this is damaging local community and Portuguese farmers, and how it's playing out to maybe some bigger, I think, political issues as well, which I'm not familiar enough with. But it's a complex topic that at the end of the day, it's all about like our ability to self-sustain ourselves as a human species or as people here on the land, not just in Portugal, but in Europe and generally throughout the planet. So it has that bigger context as well as our connection to the land and doing things maybe a bit differently than what we've been used to.
Mm-hmm. So you are part of working alongside and part of the Regenerate Portugal Association, is that correct? And they as a whole are the people who are wanting to try and sort of change things, that with the avocado plantation being one of them. Is it sort of a whole group of people together who are working together on this then?
Yes. So basically, first of all, no one's working. Of course, it's all voluntary. It's all just people from the community. I'll just as like, how do you say it? For the sake of transparency, I forgot the word. I just moved here a year ago, but I have a lot of background in knowing what's going on in Portugal generally and with the environment globally. From a undergraduate degree and a few other, just being an activist and an environmentalist throughout my life. So the specific association is an association of the people who have been living here for many, many years, and also some new people that have moved here and made it their home. Yeah. It includes mostly Portuguese and expats who have been living in the area for a few decades now, and started here when Portugal apparently, or this region, was very different and much more dependent or resilient in terms of the water management or the local, traditional agriculture, which in many ways is more similar, is more in line with permaculture or with regenerative kinds of agriculture. Throughout the time, a few years back, there started this process of creating this avocado plantation, which was like a crawling sprawl. It wasn't like 120 hectares at the beginning. And this avocado plantation was set up from, I'm not even sure if it's in Portuguese interest. Generally, it was set up with EU money, and then some Spanish companies came in. It's all for export. Like none of it is produced, is consumed locally. And it started creating it accelerated the problem that there is in this region with drying up the land, with the forest fire hazards, with wells drying up because it's consuming so much water. And on top of that, there's a problem of it being a chemical industry that is using sometimes pesticides that are either in quantities that have been measured that are way further than the amounts legal in Europe, and some of pesticides that might be banned very soon or are already banned in some countries, but for some reason are allowed here, or maybe they're not even allowed, they're just not. There's also a law enforcement problem of actually monitoring the financial forces that are running this business. So it's a problem of, so the association specifically is to stop the avocado plantation and help the authorities actually get more teeth on the regulations and where some of the things have been, some of the law has been actually overlooked.
Sure. So locally, I'm assuming there's some good support for this then, because, you know, I imagine the people who are surrounding this plantation are being affected in various different ways, aren't they? Have you had much contact with people, or has the association had much contact with people like that and sort of see what their reactions are? Are they part of it? Are they part of the association?
They're part of it. They are this is like, they are the grassroots. So the land, just to put it in context, this is the biggest avocado plantation in Europe.
It's a huge area. What was it, hectares? When did you say?
At the moment, it's 120 hectares.
It's set to grow, or is this? Are they trying to move to spread it out?
Yeah, so it's, again, I'll touch a lot of the complexities, and if people who are listening to us have clarification questions, they can either follow up or comment right now.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
They are? Okay, so I don't see the comments if they're already.
I'm just going to check and see myself, because I'm not sure if any are showing up, but if anyone has any comments and you want to pop them up, then please do, and we'll be able to see them, and we can hopefully cover them for you.
Yeah, I will let you, Claire, moderate the Facebook part, because I'm only busy with the video here. So there are different aspects to this issue. The first and the major one is that there is a huge avocado plantation that is a monoculture, which means at the end of the day, it's eroding the land and it's not creating anything regenerative. It's using water in humongous amounts. It's using 3.5 million liters of water per day. So not just because avocado is a consumer, but it's also not suitable for the area. And there are regulations that have been overlooked because of the way it was done. And it feels to me, and this is just my opinion, that it's been done, the land has been taken over in a way that the people who were doing it knew what they were doing to get like in all the loopholes of not being caught or not being regulated. For example, the main problem right now is that the association's main legal action that we want to take, and this is why we're raising the money, is to force the municipality, or actually help the municipality enforce the plantation to stop everything that they're doing until there's an environmental assessment of the damage. So there isn't even an environmental assessment, which by law is supposed to happen for any property or plantations that are above 100 hectares. The problem is that when this started, the first land that was bought or taken over was 20 hectares, and then it became 70, and then another company took another 50. So at the moment, there's 120 hectares of a plantation, but it's patched in a way that when it was bought and how it was done and who was notified, and from different aspects was just ignored. And there were actually permits. There's the organization that's in charge of this on a national level is it's called the Centro Regional Coordination and Development Commission. The abbreviation of that is CCDR. I'm not familiar enough with exactly all the nuances of what their job is, but they're in charge of the development of land and land management and development when it has to like eco-protected areas. The area around where these
people who effectively allowed that to happen, is that right, Boaz? This agency you're talking about there are the people who effectively put the permissions through or have allowed various
Well,
different
yes and
companies
no.
to take over the land?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So originally, to give you the historical context, and then we can go into the problems today. Originally, the money was given, there was EU money involved that was helping to create, support the economy, put more agriculture, help the export to the rest of Europe, tax issues, whatever. And when there's European money involved, it's apparently very difficult for local interest, even if they're environmental in Portugal, to resist that. So to start with, there was EU money that was coming in to support. But that's not even the problem, because maybe on a smaller scale, that would have been okay, even though monocultures are a problem anyway, and avocado is a water consumer. But the fact is that then the EU doesn't keep checking that. So they give the money, the project starts, and then it started growing. And as it started growing, two things happened. One, the CCDR and the local authorities actually started listening to the community and listening to the people around and the locals, and started looking for all the, basically to try to enforce the regulations. And they were just ignored. So at the beginning, there was actually like a warrant, I think it's called. I'm not sure what the word is in Portuguese, to stop the plantation, and the plantation was just ignoring it. And then there were fines that were given, and the fines were being ignored, or maybe they were paid and being ignored. But the fact is that the work kept continuing. And at some point, there were even officials that came to try to look at the place, to actually come to the gate and see and assess, and they were just totally ignored. And in off the record conversations, they basically say we have no teeth. Now the other problem is that it started with EU money with a smaller plantation, but at the moment it's not even Portuguese interests that are involved, but it's a Spanish distribution company that's in charge of buying and distributing this throughout Europe. It's somehow connected, if you ask me, to the whole monoculture greenhouse problem that they have in southern Spain, which you might be familiar with. So it's a problem in a bigger context, and the interests are so. Let's just put it this way: from a personal perspective, when we think of it with the heart, where am I with the land? Where do we want to see a country going to, or the planet going to? There are too many incidents of this being ignored, hidden, or lack of transparency that suggests that the people behind it are trying to hide something, whether it's in the acquiring of the land, whether it's in the ignoring of the regulations and actually doing some things which allegedly look illegal, to the fact that it's a Spanish company that they bring in. Even the fact that they were, for example, bringing in Spanish workers to harvest. They were driving in workers from Spain in the morning, don't know if they were legal or not, working in the plantation and then driving them back to Spain at night. If you ask me, that's usually a sign that why not give that work to locals? There's something that wants to hide whatever's happening from the locals. And that, when it comes down to it, that's the same case with the environmental assessment. So the community around has actually been measuring things. They've been measuring the pesticide, which is glyphosate, I think is the name, the pesticide quantities in the land surrounding the plantation. We're seeing drying up of local wells because of the depletion of the aquifer because of the plantation, and 2 golf courses that are using the same aquifer in the area. And we're seeing all this disregard to anything that has to do with just let's assess something. And usually, from my experience also in other countries, when there's a company or political or financial interests that are trying to ignore or avoid having an environmental assessment, is because they know that if that environmental assessment will be done, they will be stopped, because they know that they're doing something wrong. So that's the main thing, and that's the main action we want. We want to help the authorities now, hopefully with the help of the people who will contribute also, to put legal teeth on this, so that environmental assessment is done, and then according to that, we can continue. But the fact is that, yeah, so I don't know if that clarifies.
So you're really how we can help. And I suppose really a large reason that we're talking today is with the fundraiser that you've started and has been going, with a view to trying to help raise funds to empower you to have the legal action that you need. Is that correct? So to give you the legal team that you need, so to pay for that ecological survey to happen initially.
Yes, and just to add, I mean, so this is a group of locals. I mean, the association is hundreds of people who are all living in the area. There are also, unfortunately, everyone's a bit busy with the fires today or from the weekend. But there are local Portuguese that can come up and speak or write or be interviewed about this if anyone needs. I mean, I've seen some of the people commenting on Facebook that as a foreigner who's been living here for less than a year, I shouldn't be speaking about this. I just have a bigger maybe context from a global perspective. But these are locals running this. Like, this is not an expat thing or a foreigner thing at all. These are very concerned locals. Yeah. And they're concerned because they're seeing their wells drying up in their own little plant, areas and agriculture and farmers that are doing things locally, just getting pushed out of the market or even before coronavirus and lockdown issues. So they are local. So what we're raising money for is to help with the legal action. But just to even put that in context, it's not that we're paying with that money like huge fees to a lawyer. The lawyer that's actually helping us has a lot of experience with environmental struggles and legal action in Portugal. He is also local.
Okay.
And the amount of work that they're putting in and meeting with us is like, basically, it's pro bono. So the money's going for administrative fees, all kinds of the other things. If you look, our target is only 8,000 euros at the moment. We've raised a little over 2,000. So we still have 6 to go. It's not a huge amount, but it's definitely nothing that's going to pay for such a huge legal, battle. And we're trying to help the authorities have more teeth.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. As you say, yes, some people will say, as people who move in, why would you care, or why should you care? Why should you have an opinion? But actually, I speak for myself as much as anyone else who I'm sure has moved to Portugal. We moved there because we love it and love the area and love so much about the place that, ecological problems are the same wherever you go. It doesn't matter which country you've been born in or moved from. But if there's a problem, there's a problem. And in the same way, it doesn't really matter sort of how long you've been there, does it? The issue can still stand, and it doesn't make the issue any less of a problem, by saying, oh, well, I've only been here for a year or 3 years, and therefore I can't have an opinion. Monoculture is an issue which so every country in the world now pretty much faces. There's problems with this sort of practice everywhere in the world, and I don't think it really matters how long you've been in a country to see a problem. If you love a country, you want to make it its best, and if you can see something damaging people who live locally and the land, it's only the right thing to speak up. Yeah,
and maybe I'll add. Thank you for adding that. I think I'll add a personal note here, like what's my personal interest, basically. Right, because we're all driven by something. I've been coming to Portugal for several years before deciding or feeling that this is my place in the world.
Yeah.
The way I feel the country, and I might be romanticizing a bit right now, but I've fallen in love with this country, and I've fallen in love with the people. And I've also been in the actual forest fires in Monchique 2 years ago. Like while it was burning down and like helping regenerate and rebuild a center there afterwards with my bare hands. There is a pioneering love that the people of Portugal have in the way I feel it towards people. First of all, they care about people, even the government, whatever people might say about governments, the municipality, the authorities, but also the people. There's a care for what is actually important, for people, for reverence with the land, for reverence with community, And I think that's what draws so many alternative foreigners here in many ways, because we feel, or I feel, the heart of this country is in the right place. And I think sometimes there's an economic struggle between that and the need to have prosperity in a bigger European context that maybe from whatever interests in Germany or the EU are banging down on Portugal financially and actually making the struggle more difficult. But there's this pioneering understanding that the heart is here and that people are important and that the land is important. And if you take that and now touch on the forest fire issue, just to put that in context, that's something that every one single person who lives in Portugal understands and knows. And the minute you're living here, whether you're Portuguese or not, it becomes like it ingrains in your body at some point. Like at some point you'll be exposed, at some point you'll understand the disaster. But it has a bigger context. You know, there's spiritual prophecies that talk about Portugal as being one of the 5 countries or 7 countries that will lead the world into the next the next evolution of humankind. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what we're seeing today. So the problem with forest fires has a bigger context that is playing out in our local avocado plantation situation. Because I think the context I've realized through talking about this that many people don't have is that from an environmental perspective, eucalyptus trees are more adaptable to fires. They thrive from forest fires. It's a tree that sends down its roots about 20 to 60 meters deeper than any of the native trees you can see in Portugal, be it alfaroba or almonds or the cork oaks or any other kind of oaks. So regardless of the historical reasons why these eucalyptuses were brought here and how they got spread all over the country, it is an invading species. And what's happening is that it now has a competitive advantage over the native trees. Now, what you're seeing in the Algarve and in some other places also, even where there is water, is that the eucalyptuses are sucking the water out of the aquifer, out of the groundwater, and they're having a competitive advantage over the native trees. So you sometimes see an almond tree or a cork oak next to where there are eucalyptuses, and you see the cork is dying. It's slowly drying out because its roots cannot actually reach the groundwater because the eucalyptus is beating it to it. Now, that only happens if the groundwater is too deep for the native trees to reach. So it wasn't always a problem. Where I live, if you ask locals, even a few years ago, there was still water running in some of the streams. Today, there's no water. So, and if you had wells that were 4, 6, 8 meters deep, they still had water in them. Now those are drying up. The bigger plantations and the bigger, unfortunately, also some of the golf courses and the main lawns that are in the tourist industry, but mostly the plantations and the monoculture agriculture are digging boreholes that can go 80, 100, and sometimes 200 meters deep into the aquifer. And they're sucking that water out. And the only competition or the only tree that can survive that is the eucalyptus. So what we're doing is we're taking water out of the land, but we're also taking it practically out of the trees. So if a tree has less water to access, the tree is less moist. And that's part of the process of desertification that we see all over the world. And it's happening in the Algarve and in Portugal, everywhere. It can happen also in the north. It's the process of getting and having less and less water. What regenerative agriculture does, through building swales and lakes and adding water and capturing water and water retention, it adds water not only to the aquifer, but also to the vegetation itself, to the flora. And that's why it has a significant role to play in reducing the risk of forest fires and then also property and people losing their homes and all of that. But they're very connected, just not so obviously if someone doesn't have an environmental background. So the minute we're drying up the aquifer and the minute we're using crops that are extremely water intense. And the minute that we're drying up and digging bigger boreholes and not doing regenerative agriculture, then what we're basically doing is we're accelerating the risk, or we're significantly increasing the risk for fires, for forest fires, not only to happen, but to spread more quickly. And if to add to that, and stop me if I'm like, I feel like I'm in a monologue, but so like, please feel free to interject with any clarifications. Another problem is that when we're doing regenerative agriculture, like I said, we're adding the moisture. But one thing that happens with regenerative agriculture is we're looking at how species work with symbiosis. So you're not exploiting the land. There's a whole, in permaculture, there's a whole different mindset of how to do things that shifts our awareness from an exploitative practice that is looking at the land as a resource to a more harmonious one that looks at the planet and the land as a holistic system, or as a being where we are all part of it. And it looks at the ways that we can thrive through growing our food, but also the land can thrive. So for example, we will plant species that go together because they're adding nutrients and they're working in symbiosis, and they're adding water or helping with the water retention. When you start changing the mindset into the regenerative mindset, you're working with the land in a way that fertilizes it in an almost natural way that's connected to the native environment and the native climate. But one thing that you're also doing is you're creating soil. So like again, maybe I'm segueing a bit out of the topic. But if you are,
yeah, absolutely.
So this is probably relevant for any person doing agriculture. When we're doing regular agriculture, or a normal farmer, if you want, like a traditional normal, like whatever, industrial farmer, okay? When they look at land or at a place to set up anything from a winery to a plantation to trees to fruit, they look at the soil. Is the soil rich and fertile, or is it not? When a permaculture person comes, they know that within a matter of 2 to 3 to 4 years, they can create soil, topsoil on any kind of land. Because when you work with the right principles, you can help the land regenerate. And that's why you see in places in Portugal, in Silves, for example, or in some places in the Algarve, where the soil is very tough, it's not very fertile, that there are communities that are creating soil. And with this 2 or 3 years, there's this like tropical garden. I mean, there's a community next to Lagos that's growing like tropical, like bananas and everything without even greenhouses. They just create like this super moist, rich environment. And you're like, wow, how is this possible? What happens with industrial farming and monocultures is that throughout the years, they're exploiting the land. So they're creating a soil, the topsoil is not only being exploited and not regenerated, it's actually being lost. It gets washed away, it gets more loose, and the wind comes and takes it with the dust. And that's what happens, and you see it in Africa in very big areas. But at the end of the day, that creates a desolation. It exploits, it spends 5 or 10 or 20 years of growing those crops, and then it's dead. Then there's nothing you can do with that land. I'm not saying it's that extreme in Portugal, but the way our planet is going, it might be. Maybe we'll discover in 5 or 10 years that nothing can grow there. And today is the chance to actually plant things that will regenerate. So that's
the key thing, isn't it?
The main issue with monoculture, and specifically with avocado.
Yeah, it's not a lost cause. You know, that it can feel like that. I can feel like the problem is so big, you know, with when people talk about eucalyptus and obviously with the avocado plantation, as you say, but these things are not lost causes. They can be regenerated and they can be brought back. And the issue with so many of these things that are impacted on it, it doesn't have to continue that way. It can be stopped and actually reversed, not just stopped and not made better, but actually reversed completely. And when you see it all around the world, don't you? When you see what people are able to do in terms of regenerating soil and creating, you know, just water retention in general, it is possible to do that anywhere. And that means where this avocado plantation absolutely is it can be done. It can be repaired.
Yes, and for anyone who wants, again, I'm segueing, my associative mind goes in many directions, but for anyone who wants to like educate themselves from basic without knowing anything, I recommend dearly of a movie. There's a documentary, it's free streaming. During the quarantine, it was made available online for anyone. It's called Inhabit. I think the website is inhabitfilm.com. It's wonderful to get the perspective of permaculture and sustainable agriculture in any kind of context, from big farms to big lands to small city apartments. And it's a wonderful way to enter the field and get a bigger understanding of what monoculture is dangerous about.
Yeah.
Now, to add another element, there's a health issue that has to do with the avocado plantation specifically and with monocultures. And that's the fact that the industrial farming and the monoculture farming is, from a health perspective, extremely dangerous for our public health, if you want, because if anyone knows about organic, like we all like to buy organic, we like to go and have healthier food, everyone for their own reasons. Some because they are more sensitive to chemicals, and some because they just want to eat healthier, and they're in that even if it's just from a social hype that people are eating organic, that's fine, because generally we need to be healthier, and once we start, we know, our body knows. So when I started eating organic, it was like, okay, it's laying around, I'm hanging out with people who are eating it. But just to give an example, I was eating organic cucumbers and tomatoes for about a year or two without touching anything that's not organic. I didn't even notice. And then one day I bought non-organic cucumbers here in Portugal, actually, somewhere in one of the grocery stores. And my body literally had a toxic reaction to it. So the body cleanses, it detoxes. The problem with industrial farming is that the pesticides that are used are contaminating the land. Okay, they're not only contaminating crops, which we then eat. Some crops are less susceptible to the pesticides. So, for example, trees usually have a natural filtering system. So avocados or oranges know how to handle the toxins in the land, in the ground, better than lettuce or melons, which are sitting close to the ground. But still, what it's doing to the land is basically killing it. And if to put in, like, again, there's this global pandemic is changing all our awareness to a lot of things and how the system is flawed or designed to exploit. Just to give it an historical context, most of the pesticide companies, most of the companies making these chemicals used to make chemicals against humans. One of the biggest companies in the world, which is Bayer Crop Science, Bayer actually bought Monsanto. And Bayer was also the producer of Cyclone B in the Second World War. So there's economic forces that are just looking for profit, and it doesn't matter if they're exploiting people or exploiting the environment or exploiting animals. Those chemicals are bad for us. Now, if you know about organic growing, you know that to get a certification, you need the land to be cleaned from toxins for at least 7 years. So this is not something that even if we stop now, it still takes time. And what we've been measuring around this avocado plantation that is not declared by the growers, but what we've been measuring around the people who live around is sometimes 50 times higher levels of certain pesticides, 50 times more than what they're actually allowed. And that's going into the land, it's going into the local trees around, into the fig trees and the local gardens and farmers, and it's horrible. And that's eventually coming into our food. So I'll give that now another context, and that's the local interest, if you want. The fact is that with this pandemic, we're seeing also our dependency on local, right? There's this famous saying that says, once the trees are lost and the rivers are poisoned, then we will realize we cannot eat money. The fact is that Portugal as a country is extremely rich and self-sustained. It can produce a lot of energy that's clean. It can grow probably most of its own food. these are my opinions, just from my impression of the country. None of these avocados are locally consumed. So the avocados, I have a journalist friends who are still checking into it, but we're not even sure this is being used for food. But all of these avocados are going to Europe. This has to do with people in London or in Germany or in Scandinavia wanting to have avocados year-round instead of just eating what's local in season. And in the long run, especially when we see borders being closed, even inside Europe, the really important thing for the future is, can a country self-sustain itself and grow its own food? And then from the generosity of that, how can we also share and give more food to the world? The fact is that some of these avocados, maybe all of them, this is not something we've managed to actually fully check yet, but I can look for resources later. They might be consumed by the cosmetic industry. They're not even for food. Wow. So when you're buying an industrial product rather than a local one from somebody like a herbalist that's making it in your neighborhood or your community, and you're buying an industrial product by an industrial company that's making cosmetics and using all the avocado and cucumber to make it appeal more healthy, that's still coming from monoculture, industrial, and non-organic.
That's farming. A really good point. Yeah, very good point. Because that's one of those hidden things, isn't it, that people don't think about? Absolutely.
And I think it's important to bring that into awareness, because as I said, I think most of us are in the heart. Most of us want to eat more healthy. Most of us, especially now, understand the importance of community. We want to help our neighbors. We want to give people, we want to take care of people. But we need awareness as people, and the people have a power. It's not different than what's happening with racism or with, the origins of slavery or with anything else that's happening in the world. The riots in Hong Kong, they're all related to the people having the power, and we need to act on that power. And crowdsourcing and Facebook campaigns are exactly a way that we can help each other. And I think that's why we're putting out this cry, and let's put the link in the comments at the end to contribute. But also to say, in that link, there's all the information. In that link for the fundraising, everything's written, both in English and Portuguese, like a lot of information of exactly what's going on and what this money is going for, so that we can actually rise and help the authorities also. Just to put it now in an economic perspective, and I also used to work in the food industry, I have really a lot of different angles I can talk about this. From an economic perspective, today, most of the world's wealth is not being held by governments. It's being held by corporations that historically have managed to exploit the people, the political systems, other nations, whatever it is, to create wealth. But today, the authorities and the governments need our help as people to actually keep taking care, whether it's in public health care or it's in agriculture, or just literally, this is like our most intrinsic survival need, to have food and healthy food. And if you look at the US, for example, and their diet and that's done to their public health or their nation through issues of diabetes or obesity, those are all connected to how we're growing our food and what we're consuming.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and it's a huge area, as you say, the amount of space that this plantation takes up. If you can imagine that being used in a regenerated way, from a permaculture standpoint, and the amount of food it could grow in a healthy manner, it's mind-boggling, isn't it? That space could do so much more than just grow avocados that are already damaging water table and the soil at the same time. It's mind-boggling to think about what else it could do in that space.
I'll share a little personal story because it had a very strong impact on me. I used to do many different things, but today I'm more like, I have this inclination to just become a farmer if I could, because growing food seems to be more important than making money even. But I have friends who live in Vilarinha, which is where the forest fires started just in the last weekend, and then burnt a big patch. they have a lot of experience in creating projects and putting up food justice and food banks and regenerative farming, etc.
Mm-hmm.
During the quarantine, they set up a patch of land, not very big even, where they started growing food. Everything from courgettes and tomatoes to staple foods like fava and amaranth, and all of these things can grow here. And within 3 months, the amount of food that they can harvest could probably feed 2 Portuguese villages.
Yeah.
And they did these, like 2 people with a little bit of help and experience is what they've managed to do. And on, I don't know, like less than an acre, of land.
Yeah.
So when you look at 120 hectares, and I think also the willingness of local, the village I'm living in is mostly older people from Portuguese. Like most of the young people are foreigners, but there is a symbiosis there. I mean, the older generation in Portugal, God knows, they've been through a lot, with the dictatorship and everything. But at the end of the day, they know what it means to just go out every morning and grow your own cabbage or grow your own tomatoes and take care of the land without all the like industrial forces that are part of that.
Exactly. The connection is still very much there in that older generation to the land. I noticed that, but long before we moved out, I felt a very strong pull there, because in the UK, for example, where we were at the time, that connection to the land is removed by probably 3 generations now. It's not something that the people who have that deep connection to the land is not. Typically, it's not still alive. Whereas in Portugal, it's very much still there. There are people there who still have that exact connection that has been lost so much in so much else of the world now. It's very rare to find a country that still has a deep connection like that, with people who are still alive and still can pass on the information as well.
Right. And in the long term, the funny thing is that if Northern European countries, just for example, want to consume these fruits, they will actually, it's in their interests to encourage regenerative agriculture, even in places in Southern Europe, even in Spain and Portugal, over greenhouses and monocultures. There's an amazing example, which I wish will become more dominant throughout the world, from India. There's a state in northern India, I don't remember the name of the specific state at the moment, that decided 10 or 15 years ago to go fully organic as a state.
Yes.
Okay, that's like a decision for the Algarve to become organic. And they had to actually give incentives to local farmers to do regenerative work and organic and clean up the land and not use pesticides, because at the beginning there is resistance, because people resist change, and change is frightening. And that's where we can use change today as an opportunity, because it's kind of forced on us to change, right? But the fact is that the authorities worked with the local farmers. So when there's suddenly pests that come and ruin your crop, then they were taking care. There were loans, there were ways of giving grants to financially support a long-term planning that looks at 10, 20 years rather than 2 years of how to make the land more agricultural and more sustainable. And within 10 years, the state has become fully organic. But the interesting part is, as a case study, is that the yield of those crops now is 3 times more than any other state or any other place, and including from what they used to grow in that same state. So the farmers are not only growing healthier food, they're growing more food on the same patch of land while taking care of the environment.
Yeah. Well, you look at the classic. I mean, one of the first people to open my eyes up to the whole idea of how damaging monocultures are and how amazing, sort of regenerative and permaculture methods are, was good old Jeff Lawson and his regreening of the desert, as he called it, in Jordan. And you see what he achieved, and it literally was a desert. I mean, there was no getting away from it in the middle of Jordan. And even now it's still going, and the greenery and the things that are being grown there is just absolutely incredible. I mean, I think he said once he got a call from the scientists who left there working to say, "Oh, we've got a problem," a few years later, and he thought, "Oh no, what is it?" And they said there's something growing in the swales and there's a problem with them, and it turned out that it was fungus and mushrooms, and they they thought this is something that's gone wrong, you know, this shouldn't be here. And he was like, this is amazing, this is great, you know. And within such a short space of time, we're finding actual mushrooms and fungi growing in swales in a desert. So it just goes to show, if that can be done in a full-blown desert in Jordan, the Algarve, it would feel easy in you know, in comparison, really. You know, the work is half done in that sense, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's actually a very good point. Again, it's just another way that when we let the land do its thing, basically, through regenerative agriculture. For example, we don't treat weeds as weeds, right? We basically treat anything that's growing as something that the ecosystem needs. We're not plucking out weeds normally in a normal way. We're not looking at everything as a pest. We're actually looking at the contribution. And from that perspective, mushrooms, for example, and mycelium, which is like the baseline of mushrooms, they're like a whole realm in biology that we're only starting to scrape the surface of, that we don't know about. There's a wonderful movie called Fantastic Fungi. The Fantastic Fungi, I think.
I love that one,
which, for whoever's worried about it, it's not about, you know, psychedelics or anything. It's actually about agriculture and mushrooms and creating exactly the wisdom that mushrooms have to regenerate in ways that we don't understand. And there's all these understandings that today, under like the whole Amazon forest, there's a network of mushrooms that has enough connections, like a neuron brain, you know, like the pathways in our brain, that there's a wisdom there. And they've even discovered mushrooms now I was reading in Chernobyl, they discovered these mushrooms that are eating the radiation that they didn't even know about. So I think when it comes to really trusting the land and trusting nature to do its thing and finding our place there. And if to put that back in context of the last pandemic and where we are as communities, I worked for a few years as a consultant for innovation, and that included working a lot with food companies, unfortunately, which is one of the reasons also I left that whole business, that whole career. But one thing that becomes very clear is that the big mega companies that are producing food, they're almost prisoners to their stockholders and their quarterly reports, and they're almost prisoners to the shareholders and the bottom line that has to do with profit. And unless that will be changed, the food industry will still keep be driven only by profit. And the thing with profit is that it's actually comes from a very, I don't want to put it in the historical context, but it is an imperialistic, right? There's a vanity there that says, this is us, this is what we're worth, and we can do anything and everything is to our disposal. And when you're really growing a tomato, like when you're really growing even your little plants in the little garden at home, you know that there's something very empowering about growing your own food and how it produces and gives you back, but also something very humbling. Like there's a humility that we need to go back to let go of that hubris that we have as people over the land, to go back to basically our ancestral roots in that sense, to work with the land. And when we do that, the land gives us back so much. And it's exactly what people are doing with community, with the fire. It's the whole gifting economy. Like what you're seeing with the fires now is nobody's trying to give people to like get money or do sessions or, you know, sell stuff. Everyone is contributing. And there's so much abundance of everything from building materials to children's toys to clothes to pets, things. It's all here. The only problem is we've been hoarding. We've been hoarding and hoarding and hoarding and hoarding. And we don't need to hoard everything. Like we just need to really be in reverence, and the land will give back to us.
We are not bad. We're okay as humans, aren't we? Really, you know, we get a bad rap, but I think at nature we always want to help. We always run to help people whenever there's a problem. You know, it, like you say, the aftermath of the fires is a prime example of how people at their root will always naturally react to things, you know. And I think, you know, like what you guys are wanting to do with this, with the avocado plantation situation, is another version of that. It's, you know, it's somebody who's seeing something that isn't right and it's not going to work for everybody around, not just for themselves as a person who's living next door, but for every single person in that area, and the ground, the soil, not just human beings, and trying to do something about it and trying to say enough's enough. You know, we can all have a voice and we can all have an impact, and it can be good or bad, you know.
And it's a choice. I mean, you know, in the racial uprising now, they talk about silence. Silence is compliance, they say, right? So it's like, if you're silent about an issue, you're actually supporting the negative aspect of it. And that's very true about agriculture and permaculture. And if we want to look at where Portugal can go, or where Europe can go, I think it seems like it's going in the right direction. I mean, even just to look at the gas drilling that was stopped I think like 2 years ago here in Portugal, and there is success. Like, there is an awareness in this country for health and for care of people, as I said, versus if you look at the US, and where, for example, they've reached now where literally people don't have food the minute something like a pandemic hits. And their health is more endangered. So it's our choice what we do with that. And since, look, the forest fire season has just started in Portugal. I mean, we might have stuff going all the way to October. I hope we don't this year. But with the winds and the storms and the heat, so it's very ingrained in every single person that's living in Portugal, whether they're local or a foreigner that have immigrated here. It's important, very, very important, to educate ourselves. The environmental movement has been saying that for like last year very loudly throughout the protests that were all over the world. But the main thing is to come out of that ignorance, educate yourself, read, send me a message, ask me for links if you need. The forest fires are highly connected to how we are treating the land and growing our food. And this is an opportunity to help us on a small scale by contributing to our fundraising. But it's a bigger scale because this monoculture avocado plantation is the biggest in Europe. It's not even just about Portugal.
Yeah, it's so much more. Exactly that. Yeah.
And if we don't do that, if we fail,
and it's what it stands for as well, guys. You know, it's not just that plantation on its own. It's the whole it's the whole premise of what it is, isn't it? It's what it actually represents that goes with it. You know, it can be the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning. So, you know, it can really go either way. And I think you're absolutely right. The if people can actually put their foot down and have their voices heard, and these things have to go then the right way that we've been discussing so far. It can stop that sort of prior consent that's already there that allows everyone else to say, oh, well, it doesn't matter now, I'll do it as well, and it's only a bit more to add to the side, it's only a little bit bigger. or even from the eucalyptus perspective, you know, stopping one monoculture and saying enough's enough and this is not a good thing will set that pretense for the rest. It will put the message out there, and it will just get more and more people aware of how bad these issues are and how easily resolved they can be. You know, it doesn't have to be. It's not some impossible mountain to climb.
And there are examples in Portugal, even in the area where I am, near Barão São João. There's a wonderful community called Vinha Velha. Unfortunately, they didn't burn down now, but they were evacuated with the fires. They came several decades ago into nowhere and created like a whole, like planted trees, put lakes. When you go to that land, you see it's a healthy land.
Yeah.
And it's possible. There's another example in Portugal I see running around Facebook of this village that somebody bought that was like totally deserted and desolated and with no vegetation. They just made it like green within a decade. There are examples, and it's the same with energy. I mean, when we support the land, then we can also put like the wind turbines, and we can put like regenerative clean energy sources. I mean, these are all interrelated. And that's why the support is very important, and educating ourselves. Like, just, I have as I said, an academic background in environment, and I've been an activist environmentally in different intensities for the last 20, 30 years. If anyone needs and wants like baseline information or links to go deeper, just be in touch. Feel free to drop me a line. There are also other experts that are living here that are just under the radar because they see what's going on, and they don't feel like getting all the negative hate speech and stuff. But we need to come together and help each other. Just create a more sustainable lifestyle and way of living and taking care of people.
Well, let's hope we can start it with this. We're getting some more money in for your funding. I mean, that's obviously, without doubt, from having spoken to you, that is the key. That's the key point, isn't it? That is to get, once that ball gets rolling and you have the ability to start that side of things, I think it will almost give permission to other people to also speak up and to put their head above the water and kind of, it's a scary thing to do. It can feel very overwhelming and very big, but once people see one group of people achieve it in one situation, it normally gives the confidence to so many others to think, well, I can do it too now. We can also make a difference. So I think you're absolutely right. We've got to try and spread awareness as much as we can until we've got your fundraising, to the level it needs to be, which, as you say, is not a huge amount. Actually, it really isn't. When it's split between lots of people, especially, it's a very small amount of money for what is potentially a huge change. What can that actually really make a massive change?
Yeah, exactly. And I want to add an aspect to that I've personally taken here. Even when my family came to visit me, and I was like, okay, what are we going to do? We're not just going to do regular tourist stuff. And I want to add the tourist element to that. There's ecotourism that's growing in Portugal that you can use to educate yourself. If you want to come on a vacation to Portugal, you can sit in front of the beach and be in the pool and go drinking every day. Or you can use that to actually learn, and you would be amazed by what you might find. There are a few communities in Portugal, and specifically in this area, but also in Alentejo, that have been doing these kind of projects for 30 and 40 years. One next to Lagos, there's one in Alentejo. There are a few, and they give tours. All you have to do is coordinate, send an email. It's free. It's one of the most wonderful things you do, and you get to eat healthy food on the way and see beautiful places, and you'll feel the difference that there is of sitting in a place that's been taken care of versus a place that's just been concreted and made into a fancy spa or a fancy bar or whatever. So you can use your tourist vacation times also to support this kind of effort.
Exactly. It's a really good point. It's a good point. Maybe what we can do is on the bottom of this interview, once we stop, I'll add some links to all of the things we've been discussing. Obviously, your funding link especially. We'll make sure that that's on there so people can donate to that and spread around if they can. It would be great. We're going to try and see if we can, I think you could have a way we can try and get this video so that people can share it as well. So we'll make sure we can share this video. We'll put a link. I know you can't share from the group specifically because it's a closed group, but I'll make sure that we can have a link attached to this video that you can share around so people can get a real feel for what your message is, what you're trying to achieve, and obviously then how they can help, more importantly. And I'll put some other links to some of the other places that people can find out about, a bit more information and see some of the things we've mentioned here. So maybe they can just get a bigger overall picture of what it is that is causing the problem and what it is that can actually really help resolve the issues. I think that would be really good because it means that people who might come in from completely new will have a really great understanding. Then they can get a whole rounded picture of the issue at hand that you're actually facing.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. And I could see Carl posting comments while we're going. So I see that the link for Inhabit Film is already up there. So, or someone else actually posted that. So that's wonderful. That's a good start. And I would just start now with putting the link to the fundraiser. We need two things. We need money, but we need people and awareness as well, which is more related almost to the fundraising than the actual contribution. So we need both. So if you can share the post, share the link, I mean, on anywhere, you know, copy paste from whatever inside the link, there's the information, copy paste the paragraph that most appeals to you or to your people, and post that in other countries, because this is connected directly to anyone in Scandinavia who's eating healthy food, or in the UK, or in France, or in Germany, or anywhere in Europe. Because in many ways, the Southern Europe is the food supply for Northern Europe. And it's important to create that, you know, to stop that separation, to really make that also a holistic system that is healthy.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
and then just feel free to ask me any further questions or links. And also, if we want, we can do a follow-up. If you see that there are a lot of questions, we can do a follow-up interview or on a radio show. I know I've spoken with Carla about this also, with people from the, like, that are more like in the direct, you know, the management of the association. We can do one in Portuguese also.
It'd be great to follow the whole journey if we can. It'd be really great, you know, to check in with you and you know, just actually see how everything unfolds. I'm sure people would love to see and sort of follow that story, if you like. Really, it'd be really nice to be able to check in with you.
Yes.
You know, I think that's really good for people to be able to see that they're, you know, how much movement can be made. It's great. It's really inspiring, isn't it?
Yes, this is super important, and we want that to spread more. I mean, in the first meetings of the association, we actually even had journalists come in from Lisbon and Porto. So whatever we can spread out and put that into awareness, because the fact is that we're so involved with the pandemic now that we forget of other things, but they're all related. If you look at the US, you see that because of their government, instead of doing, you know, in the shadow of the pandemic, they've actually been canceling all these environmental laws. And the thing I think that we need to do here, hopefully everywhere else in the world as well, but that we can do on a local level or on a European level, is to actually use that in the other direction, is to use the pandemic and understand that our public health and our food that we consume and the food supply chains that got cut off and are endangered are all connected to how we're treating the land and how we're growing, and the fire hazard, of course, and to support that in the right direction of where humanity needs to go before it explodes in our face.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be done. And that is the thing. It's not too far. It's not too late. It can, you know, it can be done. It can be reversed, and it can be made. The outcome here can be so different. It doesn't have to be the one that it's on this trajectory to be, you know. That's the important part, isn't it?
It is, yeah, absolutely. And I can share another link if people want. I've started adding to my own personal website. I started adding a whole section that has to do with activism, and it's how those things integrate. So the environment, the political issues, like, they're all connected. And if people want, I can share that link as well. So, but the fundraiser,
absolutely. Let's make sure that we'll get the fundraiser on, because that's the real key part here. We want to make sure that people are aware before they get distracted watching all these fantastic films.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I'm keeping one link now, just the fundraiser. Please share it. Please donate. Every little donation, even if it's 10 euros, you know, you can give 500 too, or 1,000, but also 10 euros and 2 euros and 20 euros. They're all helpful. I mean, that's how we got to the 2,000 we already have, and we only need another 6. So it's not a lot of people.
Exactly that. No. Well, let's keep sharing it. I'll make sure I keep sharing it on the group for you. And obviously we'll try and get this video so that people can also share the video with a link to the fundraisers, because that means that everybody can spread that around. It's annoying that we can't get it off of the group directly. So if we can do that, and you send me that later on today, I'll make sure I share the link on the group so everybody can copy and paste it. That'd be great.
Perfect.
Thank you so much,
Claire.
Not at all. It's been lovely to chat to you. And
anytime. With these issues, anytime.
Thank you again.
Have a wonderful day.
As well.
Thank you, everyone, for commenting.
Bye.